On this week's episode of Whitetail Cribs, we visit with Mike Perry. Mike lives in Erie, Pennsylvania, and is the supervisor for the Erie Times News. Get ready to listen in on some of his favorite hunting stories and check out some impressive bucks he's tagged over the years. If you want to keep seeing these Whitetail Cribs videos, be sure to hit that like button, and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Mike Perry. This is my wife, Christine.
Hello.
And the wrecking crew, Hunter and Jonathan.
Hello.
Welcome to our home. Okay, we're gonna head right downstairs because there's not much up here other than the bedroom where I lie awake thinking of whitetails all night long. This is my game room. I'm a supervisor for the Erie Times News in transportation. I've been bow hunting since 1987 and hunting since 1977 when I started with a small game. A bunch of beards I've shot over the years. I also like to hunt spring turkey quite a bit. I also do a lot of looking for arrowheads around here. There was a lot of Indians that lived in this area and we find a lot of artifacts. All right, now we're gonna start talking about what you guys came here to see. Here's a bunch of young bucks that I shot back before antler restrictions. A couple of them are from New York, but most of them are Pennsylvania bucks. And when I first started bow hunting in 1987, there was no need to hold out for a big buck in Pennsylvania because if you shot a 6-point, it was a big deal. I mean, so my plan was I shot the first buck that I would see in Pennsylvania and usually New York with my bow, and then I would hunt Ohio and try to shoot a big buck. So I did that for many, many years until Pennsylvania finally enacted the antler restrictions, and then we started getting some nicer bucks around here. Over here is the first buck I ever shot with a bow, 1987 in Pennsylvania. Back then it was a big deal to shoot an 8-point with your bow. Right here are a couple bucks that I shot. This was a Pennsylvania buck. This buck was in New York. This is the first buck I've shot after they started antler restrictions in Pennsylvania. Actually know for sure how much this buck grew in a matter of 1 year because he has a mane on his back, coming up his back, and he was a 3-point that stayed under my stand all the time the year before. And then he came in the next year as a 2.5-year-old and I shot him with a bow. This buck here I shot in New York State, shot him in his bed, still hunting in the snow in a bedding area. I followed his tracks up to him and shot him. It's a pretty cool hunt. This buck here is the first mature buck I ever shot with my bow in Ohio. I think it was 1990 or 91. He was chasing 2 small bucks that had took his doe out of a cornfield. He was bedded in a standing cornfield with his doe. November 10th, 2 little bucks came in, jumped the does up. He chased them and they ran by me and I rattled him in actually because he was chasing the small bucks. He ran right up to me and I shot him with the bow about 20 yards. This is another bow kill from Ohio. Shot him also on November 10th, interestingly enough. He came in 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had been hunting, it was on all-day sit in a rut in a funnel in between a creek and a swamp. And he came right in, he winded me just when it was a little bit too late. He was right underneath me and I shot him. He went about 20 yards and tipped over dead. And here's another Ohio buck. This one here I shot with a muzzleloader. I started getting pictures of this buck in August in velvet, and then he disappeared up until December. He started showing back up. I still had my tag. I didn't kill him with a bow. So I started trying to find him during gun season, and I followed his tracks in the snow to a bunch of his different beds and went in there with my inline muzzleloader and shot him in his bed at 80 yards while he was laying down. This buck here I call Boss Hogg. I shot him in Ohio in 2018. I started getting pictures of him in 2012. I started hunting for him in 2014. He was about a 140 then, and this buck taught me a lot about trying to hunt the wrong wind, not the right wind for me. The wrong wind for me is what he taught me. He would always go through the area on the opposite wind that I needed. So I started realizing I got to figure out a way to kill this buck and hunt him with the wind right for him. And what I did was I went in there with a high pressure and he came through totally downwind of me on a trail that paralleled a creek. and I shot him at 20 yards, and he went about 50 yards and piled up. This buck here is a buck I call Super Freak. I started getting pictures of him in 2014, and I came close to shooting this buck in the early season on the first day and in the late season, the only time I ever would see him. But I noticed through trail camera pictures that between the 6th and the 12th of November, he walked the edge of this transition of this swamp. I found great access going down a creek where I could walk and not leave any ground scent. I walked right down through the water, and I hunted that stand every single day for 6 days. So if people tell you you can't hunt every day and kill a big buck, they're wrong. And I saw him 3 out of the 6 days, and the last day when I shot him was the 14th of November, and there was 3 Pope and Youngs chasing around one doe, and he stopped. Just luckily, he was the one that stopped under my stand, and I shot him at like 6 yards, and he went 50, 60 yards and piled up dead. This buck here is another buck that I shot with a gun in his bed. I shot him in Ohio. He was bedded in some sawgrass on the edge of a swamp. I followed his tracks in the snow down to where he was bedded, and he jumped up in front of me and took off running down the Beaver Run. I shot him 3 times, hit him all 3 times. I never gave him a chance. He didn't go very far. This buck here is another Ohio buck that I shot in a funnel with a bow, and it was November 2nd. I can't remember what year it was. And he came down through the funnel first thing in the morning, 20-yard shot, and he didn't go very far either. This buck here is the first mature buck I ever shot. I shot him with a gun in 1989, but he taught me that mature whitetails are awfully smart, and I'm glad that I hunted him because I would have never learned that without knowing about this buck. He rose up in front of me in a goldenrod field one day when I was scouting, and as a car was coming down the road, he went back down into his bed, and as the car went down the road, he stood back up. I noticed that he was bedding right by my truck where I was parking in a thicket about 25, 30 yards off the road. And it was, there was rubs in the bed, and that was the only reason why I knew it was a buck bed. I just came up with that on my own. Now everybody knows it. But so I ended up almost killing him the 18th of November with my bow, and then I ended up shooting him on the first day of gun on the 22nd of November, I think it was. This buck here is a PA bow kill. It's one of the few bucks I've ever shot in early season, October. That was, a decent buck. And this is basically, what the PA bucks around here are going to be like, that 110 to 120 inch on average, which is what a bunch of these down here are. This buck here, same thing, PA. These are all public land bow kills. This buck here is a buck that I shot in Pennsylvania after the antler restrictions, and this is when we started noticing some nicer bucks around here. No, they're not high scoring bucks, but that's what we have around here to hunt. This is another PA buck that, again, I shot in his bed with a rifle. This one was a rifle. I was still hunting through a clear cut, and he was laying down in a divot. There was a tree top laying over it, and all that was sticking up was his head. And I had been going real slow with the binoculars, and he wasn't 25 yards from me. He was just on the other side of a little hemlock tree. And he saw me the whole time, but I couldn't see him until I got on the other side of the hemlock. And when I seen him, I did a double take with the binoculars. And it probably took me an hour to go 100 yards, and I shot him right in his bed in the neck. It was the only shot I had. This is another bow kill from Ohio. Not exactly sure what year I shot him because I've shot so many of them, but I do remember he went about, 60, 70 yards after I shot him. So this buck here is a buck I shot 4 or 5 years ago during gun season. It was the first week of gun. I went in there trying to still hunt. There was snow on the ground, and I caught some big tracks with a group of deer, and I started still hunting to a bedding area that I knew of. And I know all the bedding areas in this public property pretty well. They jumped up and they ran towards another bedding area. So I had to circle way around to get to the next bedding area I thought they would go to. And I jumped them out of that bedding area. So then I had to circle back around to the next bedding area that I thought they would be at. And I jumped them again out of that bedding area. This went on for 6 hours until finally he broke away from the doe and tried to cross the creek, and just as luck would have it, other hunters were on the other side of the creek, and he heard their voices. I heard them talking. He heard their voices, and he took off, busted ice, and ran towards me in this stuff that was so thick you could barely see 10 yards, and he ran right up to me 10 yards, and I shot him point blank range with my rifle. This buck I shot in, I believe it was 2015 with my bow on some public property in Pennsylvania. The thing about this buck is, like this buck down here, that took 5 hours to drag that buck out because I couldn't get across the creek. It had risen too high. This buck here, I had a stand on a beaver dam levee, and I went in there, hunted mobile, of course, and I was on a beaver levee, and it was November 7th, and the deer were just running wild. The bucks were going crazy. There was does running, bucks running all over the place. This was like the 5th or 6th buck I saw that morning. I shot him at 9 in the morning. He was following the does down, he was following 2 little bucks down the creek, and I grunted him over, and he came in, tried to get downwind of me. I was right on the edge of a beaver dam, and there was only a few yards behind me, so he actually got on my downwind side until I could get a good shot on him, and I shot him. And the funny thing is he ran off about 30 yards and laid down in some goldenrod. And the way the wind was blowing, I thought he was moving his head. So I sat in my stand for 4 hours watching this buck that was dead the whole time, dead as a doornail. But hey, at least he didn't get away. And it took me 3 hours to get him out after I realized he was dead. Okay, this buck here, I shot in New York State in 2000. At the time I shot him, he was bigger than the state record by 13 inches for muzzleloader kill. But I never get anything entered in record books, so it didn't really matter that much. But I was hunting with some friends of mine. We had gotten a call that this buck was seen in the area. And it was a farm that I'd been rabbit hunting, and I bow hunted a little bit also. I had shot a couple deer out of there during bow season and 1 deer in gun season. And this buck was seen, within 2 days left in the season. So my friend Sean Madura called me up, and he said, we're going to go put together a hunt, see if we can push this buck out of this area. So we pulled up there and went in to hunt, and Sean actually got the first shot at him. Sean hit him down low in the leg right here. So me and his cousin and one of my best friends, Bill Kennelly, we decided to swing up around. I'm the one that knew the property. I'm the one that had the permission there. And it's all old grape vineyards, overgrown grape vineyards. There's a bunch of hedgerows and funnels in there. So we figured we were definitely going to get another shot at him. And Sean was going to follow the blood trail. So Sean was on the road waiting to follow the blood trail. And just when that happened, Bill and I were trying to get in position, and we saw this buck bedded down in the hedgerow about 100 yards away, a little more maybe. So Bill had a flintlock and I had an inline. So we knew what was going to end up happening. Meanwhile, Sean was following the blood from when the deer came across the road, and he was walking through the field following the blood trail. And I crawled. The snow was about 12, 14 inches deep that day. And I crawled, and I was shooting an inline with just a round ball and a patch. No scope, nothing. And I crawled about 70 yards up the hedgerow because I didn't have a scope, so I didn't want to shoot too far. And I rose up behind the buck, and he was laying there looking down the direction where he had came. He was bedded down looking the direction he had came, and I rose up and I shot him, and he took off and he ran back the way he came and was running right at Sean. And Sean's standing there with his flintlock trying to shoot the buck because he didn't know exactly what was going on. And his gun wouldn't go off. And the buck ran almost right up to him and fell over dead right in front of him. It was one of the most awesome things I ever saw. But yeah, luckily we weren't that far from the road. So I knew I wanted to get him mounted life size because it was a once in a lifetime buck, especially when you live in Northwest Pennsylvania. So we actually carried him out of the woods whole and brought him to the taxidermist. One of my best friends is a taxidermist, so kind of helps out when you hunt deer a lot. Brought him there and he skinned him out for a full body mount. That's my deer, that's my game room, that's it. You guys are gonna have to get going because I can't suck my gut in any longer.
Thanks for watching this episode of Whitetail Cribs. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you're wondering who the heck we are and how the heck we travel across the country to record these episodes, we are Exodus Trail Cameras and simply believe quality trail cameras should not cost a fortune. That's why 5 years ago, we started a direct-to-consumer company to tackle some of the biggest frustrations we've seen as typical trail camera users: product longevity, product performance, and customer service. We simply build cameras that flat out work in the harshest conditions and back them up with best-in-class customer service. We're proud to say we have the industry's leading 5-year warranty that even includes theft and accidental damage coverage. If you'd like to learn more about Exodus and the products we have to offer, click the link in the description and head over to our website. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in a comment below or shoot us an email.